Welcome to Tennis Spin, where we put our spin on your tennis. Today, what's going on with college tennis now that the athletes can get paid? Stay tuned. All right, ready?
Out.
The ball was in. You cannot be serious. You cannot be serious. The ball hit the paint. Paint flew up. Did you not see that? Are you blind? You need an eye doctor. You cannot be serious. Oh, wait. I have SwingVision.
The ball is in.
All right, guys, so you've heard it everywhere. Sporting news, ESPN, everybody's been talking about this for years when it comes to football. All right, athletes want to get paid. They don't want to put their bodies on the line and get injured and get crippled for life and can't get paid a penny, and they gave up their body for nothing. Now, how does that affect tennis? Will recruiting be different? Can you pay for the best tennis players in the country to attend a particular school? Is that fair? Well, I got Coach Peter Bartlett to answer those questions. Coach Peter, thank you for joining me today. Yes. I've been thinking about this ever since the college football people have said, I really need to get paid for this. And I'm thinking, well, you kind of already are with a scholarship, and now they're wanting cash in their pocket. I'm sure it's already been happening. We don't know. It's quiet money in their, in their money from boosters and whoever. We're not going to get into that right now, though. But we're going to get into how it affects college tennis now. So Coach Peter, what do you know about, recruiting? Can the big programs recruit those players with this type of money by buying them?
Well, I agree with you, meaning what do I agree on is at some level they're already getting paid. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that is in the form of a scholarship. That's a value, right?
Right.
A scholarship has a value. So to say that, a Division I institution doesn't already compensate an athlete, I can recruit that athlete to that institution for that reason. I then pay them that scholarship. That value can go for, as long as they attend that school. What also is happening and has been for the last 5 to 7 years is there's 2 different stipends that those athletes can also get. That is, in addition to their athletic scholarship, the Alston stipend, as well as the cost of attendance stipend. So there are institutions that fairly can raise the money for these 2 different pay stipends. And already that competitive landscape has been laid. So meaning that already programs are doing that these 2 stipends are you can't give an exact dollar amount because each institution has a different cost of attendance. And it's a choice that the institution makes to raise the money for those stipends. So there are some institutions in the Division I that do not pay those stipends, and then there are some that do. And that is your competitive advantage at some level. The richer, wealthier programs, typically the Power 5 conferences, have been doing this since the induction of these particular stipends. So that's made a competitive, I would say, unlevel playing field when it comes down to trying to compete for those particular athletes.
Right. So if I'm a blue chip tennis person, and I'm like a junior in high school, and I'm getting, all these offers from all these colleges, right? Will there be a school that just has all this pot of gold, let's say, and I was like, you get a full ride plus $50,000 for coming here a year. Is that something possible?
Well, again, as to what's currently happening,
Mm-hmm.
you do have, again, these two stipends. So again, in my particular case at USF,
Mhm.
we did not pay those stipends.
Right.
But a competitor of ours, BYU, paid those stipends. So whenever I'm recruiting, Pepperdine paid those stipends. USD paid those stipends. So what ends up happening is when you're recruiting that athlete, and then all of a sudden that athlete or their parents ask, and they say, do you pay the Alston stipend or do you pay the cost of attendance? And you're saying no,
Mm-hmm.
and they're saying yes, then they now have to make that decision. Is $5,000 or $15,000 worth going to that institution? Or are you going to go for the coaching? Or are you going to go for the university? Are you going to go for the education? But that's, kind of small differential money.
Right.
What you're now going to get next is going to be potentially a bigger framework based on some lawsuits that have happened in the NCAA just recently in the last month and a half, that's going to break open all of that piece and just plain and simply be a pay-to-play, in a sense, scenario.
So a team can essentially be like the Los Angeles Dodgers in baseball. You have the biggest salary out there, and you're getting all the best players. So you could have a stacked tennis team. Is that what you're telling me?
Absolutely. And again, outside of these stipends, you also have this thing called NIL, name, image, likeness. So that currently is in the climate as well. But you just don't see in our sport of tennis that many NIL contracts that are that large. Mm-hmm. But that is also a recruiting tool. So if that institution can, in a sense, promise or have a syndicate that can promise that athlete a certain amount of money to come, and this is what happens in basketball and football,
right,
then that is definitely a recruiting tool for them. That actually is going to get even larger and without guard, meaning that the NIL money is going to be melded with the institutions, and then you will, again, like I said, have a bit more of a pay-to-play scenario. There'll be, first of all, with this billion dollar payout, you're going to see something that looks a little bit like, paying past players for past performance.
Oh.
Yes, you will see a little bit of that, and that's going to happen mainly at the Power 5 conferences, and obviously in the larger sports like football and basketball, and that's going to have a trickle down effect depending on what that is. But in a sense, it was a lawsuit that in a sense the NCAA lost, so they'll be on the line for that, and that's really what's changed everything. Right. That will change everything, and most of the laymen do not, kind of don't know that. They read that they lost a lawsuit, but they don't understand how that's going to cascade down to changing, in a sense, the effectiveness. You won't really have amateur athletics anymore when they go to this pay-to-play model, because then what's going to happen is they are going to be allowed to raise money. Mm-hmm. So if you'd like to continue to pay that player, that institution can raise that money, in a sense, to pay that player. And then the institution will have to make the decision on how valuable each sport is and how much they would like to pay a tennis player per se versus a basketball player versus a football player. And we know that the revenue sports are the footballs and basketballs of the world. So the non-revenues aren't going to be as valuable. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, at the Power Fives and some of those bigger conferences, there's going to have some trickle down that will definitely be attractive for recruiting.
Yep. So you were just saying that tennis is not a revenue drawer. You don't really make money in tennis from attendance, but you do in football, basketball, and you can make a ton of money in that.
Yes.
So are you telling me that, let's say the Alabamas of the world, the LSUs, the the Floridas of the world, where they have powerhouse programs. They make a ton of funds there. It trickles down to their tennis and can make their tennis stronger.
Yes. That's exactly
wow.
Right. And that's really what you also have now. I mean, that's why they can afford those stipends. But you have those, and when we talk about the Power Five, we're talking about those the larger conferences with typically the football that again becomes a major cash cow with the TV rights mainly. So yeah, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see that, and then you're going to see this have and have-nots, as we spoke about a little bit earlier, where again a mid-major institution like the University of San Francisco, in my particular case, will have to make some very interesting decisions as to whether they'll be able to be competitive, and not just them, but any mid-major institution will have to look at the model in which they operate under, and figure out how lean they want to make the programming.
Yeah.
Right. And meaning get down to a certain amount of sports that they think they can afford and be competitive with. So that's one possibility that they would go to. Or you're going to see frustration out of those institutions that say, let's reclassify.
Yeah.
Let's reclassify and let's go back to an integrity model, right? Like the Ivy League, where they don't pay. Right. They pay no scholarship, right? Or Division III, where they pay no scholarship. So you'll have to figure out what that's going to look like, and in a sense, almost divide the two entities, as in the disparity between a lower level mid-major and a high Power Five, and figure out whether you want to reclassify and they're playing a different championship or they're playing for a different thing. So that hasn't been determined. That's what I think you're going to see in the next 5 years. Is that pushing out and the parity start to be created.
And that parity is only going to grow in the next 5 years.
Yes.
That's not going to look very fair.
Well, that's the thing. I think when you look at it from the different perspectives, the Power Five wants this.
Oh, okay.
Why? Because they're already competing this way, right? So they would like that, and they would like less competition so that they can just get right down to the fundamentals of what it is to win a national championship or whatever they're doing, right? But that will definitely make the ecosystem not as diverse, right? When it comes down to they're competing against only 25, 30 schools for that championship.
Exactly.
The rest can't afford to do it. So now what are the rest going to do? Well, they'll have to figure out what that is going to look like.
Wow.
Right?
So you're basically going from, I'm just thinking out loud in a tennis draw. You're going from like 128 person draw or 132 person draw, now playing the way we're possibly going to play in the next 5 years. We're literally just going into the quarterfinals here.
It's not a bad analogy, because the reality too is what you're going to get is people that will either be able to afford it and compete, or people that will not be able to afford it and compete. And we say people, we're talking about institutions. Right. And then those leaders of those institutions, and what the silver lining for them is there's been undue pressure in those institutions already to compete right now. They could reevaluate what the integrity of that institution looks like and say, okay, some of that pressure could get released by not going into the pay-to-play, world.
Right.
And say, okay, well, we're going to release some of this money. We'll get back to a little bit of what the institution is, build the academic integrity back, and then, figure out what a secondary competitive environment looks like, versus them trying to play that game, which is really where, and you see some success with some mid-majors, right? You look at a Gonzaga in basketball. Okay, they've done a pretty good job. You look at Pepperdine in tennis, and our tennises, so they can do it, but they're going to have to just continue to figure out what that is, especially as the ramping of money gets even tougher to compete with.
Right.
Because that's going to be a whole nother level of raising money. But it's each institution's decision, and those conferences and some of those, I think some of those, some of that will be met with demise,
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I mean, I'm sorry to hear about USF. I hear of other college institutions possibly folding too. Why would they do that? Do they just not want to get into this game?
I think in our particular case, we don't know all the answers. I think that there are some financial pieces there that were not, fully transparent to us.
Right.
And it could be, like I explained, a bigger competitive model, something that's being seen down the road.
Right.
It's obviously in our case, it was a sad news and things like that. But I do feel like the next 5 years, all institutions, including ours and a lot of our counterparts, in the WCC, our West Coast Conference counterparts, will have to make those evaluations on which programs, they see as valuable and competitive relative to that, relative to the new model that may be coming down the pipe.
Sure. And Coach Peter and I are talking about tennis specifically here. But I mean, there's other sports that are kind of in that same boat too, because unless you are a, money making sport, which is only two out there, right? Football and basketball, anything can happen,
right?
Because if you're a smaller program and you don't have football, your basketball program isn't strong, right? Right? Anything can really, really happen. Yeah. And they can easily, cut the cord. And it's not going to look pretty for that school in certain sports. Yeah. Coach Peter, what is the best case scenario that can happen either within the next 5 years or after the 5-year mark?
Well, I think that's the question mark. I think you're just going to start to see these realignments. What does best case scenario look like? Well, it also could be that, all of this is predicated on who's watching and who wants to consume this. Yeah. So, what does that look like in the next 5 to 10 years? If people don't want to consume what they see, there could be changes, right? Sure. So that part, you never know. I think you're going to see also this realignment in some of the stuff that's happened thus far. Probably in the next 3 years, you're going to see some of the teams that went from the West Coast, the Stanfords and Cals, and have to play now all of a sudden in an Eastern-based conference. That's going to be tough for them. And that may not be financially responsible. So you're going to see a realignment possibly in the next 2 or 3 years. But again, each institution will have to figure out whether they can afford that. And whether it's worth it for them, or you'll get a realignment that will bring it back to the West Coast that creates value.
Got it. All right, so I want to thank special guest Coach Peter Bartlett for telling us what's really going on in college tennis. Hopefully, the teams stick around and thrive, but in terms of the landscape in the next 5 years, it's kind of a, cross your fingers and hope the programs out there that aren't the powerhouses in football and basketball, stick around and really try to compete. Thank you, Coach Peter, for your time.
Certainly. Right. Thanks.
Guys, thank you for watching Tennis Spin, where we put our spin on your tennis.